Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I finally got out of the diner. The place had emptied out after the late night rush, and I was exhausted. There's something about the way the world feels at that hour. Heavy, like the air itself is thick with something just out of reach. The streets were silent, the kind of silence you only get in the dead of night when everyone's tucked away in bed and the world is left to its own devices. I climbed into my car, a worn-out sedan that had seen better days. It started up with a reluctant cough, but it ran. That's all that mattered to me. The drive home should have been simple, but of course, it never is. The road I take is a two-lane highway that cuts through miles of nothing. No houses, no lights, just trees, fields, and more trees. The kind of place where you're never sure if the fog is hiding something, or if it's just the fog itself that's haunting. The headlights barely cut through the mist that clung to the road like a living thing. As I drove, the emptiness of it all pressed in on me, a weight I couldn't shake. I rolled down the window a bit, hoping the cool night air would clear my head, but instead, it only made the air feel heavier. I kept my eyes on the road, but the longer I drove, the more the road seemed to stretch on forever. And then, just when I thought the night couldn't feel any colder, I saw her. A woman, standing by the side of the road. She was wearing a long white dress that fluttered in the wind, her hair hanging in wet strands down her back. For a moment, I thought maybe she was just another lost soul in this godforsaken stretch of highway. Someone who'd broken down or was waiting for a tow truck. But something about her didn't sit right. I slowed down as I approached, wondering if I should stop or if I should just keep going. Something told me to keep driving, but my hands were already easing the car to a halt, the tires crunching against the gravel at the edge of the road. I rolled the window down, more out of curiosity than anything else. Need a ride? I called out, trying to sound friendly, like I wasn't about to drive right past her. She didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me. Her eyes were dark, too dark, and the way she looked at me made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I waited, unsure of what to do, my foot hovering over the accelerator. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. It was a simple motion, but something about it felt off. Like she was agreeing to something I didn't understand, something I didn't want to understand. But I unlocked the door anyway. She slid into the seat beside me without a word, her presence immediately sending a chill through the car. I couldn't help but notice how cold the air suddenly felt, even though the night was still warm. We drove in silence for a few miles, the only sound the hum of the engine and the faint hiss of the tires against the road. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but I could feel her gaze, even though I couldn't bring myself to look at her. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of her out of the corner of my eye, her face pale, her eyes fixed forward, never blinking, never moving. The air around us seemed to grow colder with each passing mile, and the fog outside grew thicker, rolling in like a living thing. It didn't make sense. I had driven this road 100 times, and there was never this much fog. It was almost like the darkness itself was pressing in, closing us in. "Where are you headed?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence like a knife through cloth. She didn't answer. Her lips didn't move. I glanced at her, trying to catch her eyes, but she was staring out the window, her face illuminated only by the dim glow of the dashboard lights. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the growing sense of unease creeping up my spine. But the tension in the car was suffocating, like the very air inside was turning against me. A few miles later, I made a wrong turn. I don't know why I did. The road I was on should have been the one that led me back to the main highway, but somehow I ended up in a place I didn't recognize. The trees were taller here, and the mist was so thick I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. I tried to turn around, but the road was narrow, the trees pressing in on both sides. My headlights barely cut through the fog, and the further I went, the darker it seemed to get. I looked over at the passenger seat. She was gone. At first, I thought I'd missed something. I glanced over quickly, thinking maybe she had just shifted or moved out of sight, but there was nothing. The seat beside me was empty. The door was still locked. I slammed on the brakes and stared ahead, heart pounding in my chest. I looked in the rear-view mirror, expecting to see her standing behind the car, but there was nothing there. The road was empty. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, watching me. My hands were shaking as I started the car again, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Had I been too tired, too caught up in my own head? But as I looked around, it became clear I had no idea where I was. I drove for what felt like hours, turning down roads that led nowhere, passing the same trees, the same patches of fog over and over again. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get back to the main highway. I felt like I was stuck in some kind of loop, trapped in a place I couldn't escape. I finally stopped the car, hoping to figure out what to do next. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, standing in the fog by the side of the road, was the woman. She wasn't moving, just standing there, her face hidden in the mist. And then I saw it, the same dark, empty eyes staring at me from the shadows. I couldn't breathe. My foot slammed on the gas, and the car shot forward, tires screeching. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel, my heart hammering in my chest. I eventually found my way back to the main highway, but something had changed. The road felt different now. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Now, every time I drive that road, I see her. The same woman, standing in the same spot by the side of the highway. Her hollow eyes follow me as I pass. No matter how fast I drive, no matter how many times I look in the rearview mirror, I can't escape her. And I know, deep down, that I never will. Story 2. It was one of those nights when the world feels asleep, and the only sound you hear is the hum of your car's engine. I had been on the road for hours, winding through stretches of nothing but darkness, a blanket of stillness covering the land like an old, worn-out quilt. It's the kind of night that makes your thoughts feel a little heavier, and the silence feels so thick you can almost touch it. I glanced in my rearview mirror. That's when I saw them. A set of headlights, small at first, like a distant star, but slowly inching closer. Nothing strange about that. It was just another car probably heading the same way. But something gnawed at the back of my mind, something I couldn't shake. I glanced again. The headlights were still there, and they were closer now. But that's the thing, the closer they got, the more it felt wrong. They were too far behind to be tailgating, but they weren't falling behind either. They just hovered. A sudden unease crept up my spine. No, it wasn't a normal car. The road was deserted. There were no other vehicles around. No street lights. No signs of civilization. Just me, the endless black road, and those headlights, like twin eyes staring me down from the distance. I tried not to think about it. Tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was some guy on a lonely drive, just like me. But the more I looked, the less I believed that. I pressed my foot down on the gas, trying to put some space between myself and whatever was behind me. The headlights blinked in the rearview mirror as if they were trying to keep up, but no matter how fast I went, no matter how much I floored the pedal, they stayed locked in place. It was like they were tethered to me, stuck in perfect sync, hovering in the same spot, no closer, no further away. I tried everything to shake it off. I took a sharp curve, drove faster, slammed on the brakes. But every time I looked back, those headlights were still there, like they were waiting for something. Every time they stayed at the same distance. Every time that feeling gnawed harder in my gut. The loneliness of the road didn't help. The fog had started to roll in, thick and suffocating. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead of me. The world reduced to a blur of blackness and shadows. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was just behind me, waiting to reach out and pull me into the dark. Then I hit a stretch of road where the pavement went on for miles, and I didn't see a single sign, a single building, nothing. No other cars, no light. Just me and the endless stretch of tar winding through the void. That's when I decided to test it. I slammed my foot down on the brake hard. The tires screeched against the asphalt, and I felt the jolt of the car as I brought it to a stop. My heart was pounding, and I was already gripping the steering wheel tighter than I had ever gripped anything before. I sat there, breathing hard, watching the rearview mirror. The car behind me did the same. It was as if it was mimicking me, mirroring my every move. The headlights came to a stop right when I did, exactly the same distance, exactly the same spot. I could feel the cold sweat starting to soak into the back of my shirt as I turned to look again. Nothing. The headlights were gone. The road behind me was as empty as the road ahead. Just blackness. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. It couldn't have been that fast, could it? But there was nothing there. No other cars, no headlights, no movement. Just an empty stretch of road that seemed to go on forever, stretching into the void. I swallowed, unsure of what I was seeing, unsure of what was real. I pulled my foot off the brake and started driving again, more cautiously this time. Every inch of me was alert now, every sense heightened, hyper-aware of the road and the shadows around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, following me, watching. I kept driving. The engines hummed the only sound in the otherwise dead silence. And then it happened. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, and there they were, those headlights. But this time, they were closer. Not much, just a little. Enough for my stomach to tighten and a chill to creep up my spine. I couldn't look away, couldn't tear my eyes from the mirror. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I had to know what this was. I sped up, my foot pressing harder on the gas. I pushed the car faster. my eyes glued to the rear view, expecting the headlights to follow suit, to match my speed. But they didn't. They stayed there, locked in place. They stayed at that exact distance, no closer, no further, as if they were never going to move. I couldn't stop myself. I hit the brakes again hard, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I could catch them off guard. I watched, eyes wide with anticipation. The headlights did the same, stopping right when I did. They didn't blink. They didn't even flicker. They just stayed there. I turned to the side of the road, my car nearly swerving off the pavement, and when I glanced back at the mirror again, nothing. No headlights. No car. Just the darkness stretching back behind me, quiet as the grave. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight, my heart thumping like it was trying to break free. I pulled over to the side of the road and sat there for a long time, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The silence felt like it was closing in on me. I stayed like that, staring at the empty road, unsure of what was real and what was just the madness creeping into my mind. I must have been sitting there for a while, because when I finally gathered the courage to look in the rearview mirror again, I saw them. The headlights. And this time, they were closer than they had ever been. I don't know how long it's been since that night. The days have blurred together, and I can't seem to escape that feeling of eyes watching me from behind. Every time I drive that road, it happens again. Every time I glance in the rear view, I can hear the hum of that engine. The headlights are always there, just waiting, locked in place, watching. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to shake the feeling that I'm not alone, that there's something following me, something that won't ever let me go. Story 3. I've never been a fan of long drives at night. It's not the kind of thing you can get used to, especially when you're the only one on the road. There's something about that solitude, that deafening quiet, that makes every shadow seem a little too dark, every rustle of wind a little too sharp. But that night, I had no choice. The work was late, the roads were empty, and I had to make the drive home. The road to my place is long and lonely. There's nothing out there but the dark stretch of asphalt cutting through miles of trees, fields, and nothingness. No gas stations, no houses, just endless miles of blackness, with the occasional flicker of a streetlight casting long, twisted shadows on the pavement. It's a road you take when you have no other option, the kind of road that makes you wish you'd left earlier or taken a different route altogether. That night, the fog was thicker than usual. It was a soupy, oppressive kind of fog, the kind that wraps around your car like a wet, heavy blanket, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. My headlights barely cut through it, leaving me with nothing but an endless sea of white in front of me, a blur of shadows at the edges of my vision. The air was damp, and I could feel the moisture clinging to my skin, seeping into the car through the cracks in the windows. It was around 1 a.m. when I noticed something strange. I've driven this road countless times, so I know it well. But that night, the landscape seemed different. I passed a familiar dilapidated sign, a rusted, peeling thing that's been there for as long as I can remember. It always makes me feel uneasy, like a reminder that this road is going nowhere. But that night, as I passed it, something nagged at me. I'd swear I saw it out of the corner of my eye just a second earlier. A flicker of movement, maybe? I shook it off. After all, It was just the fog playing tricks, right? But then I saw the sign again. I could see it through the fog as clearly as I'd seen it the first time. Its weathered edges, its faded lettering. I glanced at the road ahead, then back at the sign. I had passed it already. I was sure of it. That's when the first pang of unease hit me. I pressed on, trying to shake the feeling off. But a few miles later, I passed the same sign again. Same spot, same rust, same faded letters. This wasn't just some kind of mistake or my mind playing tricks on me. I was going in circles. I checked the GPS on my phone, but it was useless. The screen flickered, and the signal dropped, leaving me with nothing but a blank map. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was pounding now. The trees on either side of the road were beginning to look wrong too. They were growing crooked, their trunks twisting in unnatural ways, leaning toward the road like they were trying to pull me off track, like they were somehow watching me. The fog thickened and the temperature dropped. My breath fogged up the windows, and I rubbed at them, trying to see better. But no matter how much I wiped, the world outside remained obscured, a ghostly smear of white and shadow. I pressed down on the gas pedal, hoping to speed past whatever was happening, hoping to break free of this loop. But no matter how fast I drove, the road stretched out endlessly in front of me. The same stretch of highway, the same signs, the same trees that seemed to lean closer and closer, as though they were trying to close in around me. I don't know how long I kept driving. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time lost all meaning as the road kept repeating itself. I couldn't see the end of the road, couldn't see any signs of anything changing. It was as if the world had stopped, frozen in place. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I finally saw something different. A rusted sign at the end of the road, almost buried by the fog. I slowed down, half relieved, half dreadful, and as I approached it, the words became clearer. Welcome to nowhere. I stopped the car, the engine sputtering as I cut the ignition. My hands were trembling. My heart was hammering in my chest. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. I was never supposed to find this sign. I was never supposed to reach this point. I looked around, my eyes searching for anything familiar, anything that could explain what was happening. But there was nothing, just the sign, standing like a marker in the middle of nowhere, with the fog swirling around it like something alive. The road behind me was just as empty, just as endless as it had been before. I've never been able to find that road again. I've driven down that same stretch of highway dozens of times since that night, searching for the sign, searching for the end, but it's as if it was erased from existence, wiped from the map. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving home, I'll see that same rusted sign in my rearview mirror, standing there in the fog, waiting for me. It's always just out of reach, a silhouette in the distance, as if beckoning me to return. And no matter how fast I drive, no matter how far I go, the road never seems to end. The fog always comes back. The trees always bend closer. And somewhere in the distance, I know that sign is waiting, just beyond the edge of the world, reminding me that there's always a place where the road doesn't end, and you're never truly free.